Okay, so nice to meet you all. And this is the fourth IESR and GLO joint conference. And my name is Xuesen. I'm from IESR, and I'm also a GLO member, and I'm the chair today. So before we start, let's first invite Professor Feng, the Dean of IESR and also GLO China lead, and Professor Zimmerman, the president of GLO, to give us opening remarks. Okay, so Professor Feng, yeah.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is Shuaizhang Feng from IESR at Jinan University. So first, on behalf of the Institute for Economic and Social Research, IESR at Jinan University, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to participate in the fourth IESR-GLO Joint Conference. So let me say very briefly a couple of words about IESR first. The Institute for Economics and Social Research was founded at Jinan University in December 2015. IESR currently has more than 40 full-time faculty members, most of them with a PhD degree in world-renowned institutions, and the research interests include diverse fields such as labor, econometrics, environmental economics, urban economics, macroeconomics, trade, and industrial organization. And so far, we have over 120 research papers published or forthcoming, including leading journals such as American Economic Review, Review of Economics and Statistics, Journal of Econometrics, International Economic Review, Journal of International Economics, etc. Also, IESR have built very extensive collaborative working relationships with top scholars and institutions around the world. We are very privileged to have Professor James Hickman as the chair of the advisory board. We also hold summer school jointly with the Center for Economics of Human Development of University of Chicago every year. And also IESR is also very honored to collaborate with GLO on this IESR-GLO annual conference series. This series is aimed to provide a platform for scholars and experts to exchange ideas on the current pressing economic and social issues. Last year, we had a very successful conference on the economics of COVID-19. This year, the theme is about social safety net and welfare programs, and in particular, social assistance programs. We are very, very honored to have Professor Robert Moffitt and Professor Tim Smithy as the keynote speakers. We also have some other very interesting papers, as well as a policy forum tomorrow at the same time, discussing social assistance programs in different countries. So I think it's a very interesting portfolio, and I personally very much look forward to these very interesting talks in the next 3 days. And I hope all of you can also enjoy the conference. Actually, where I am now, Guangzhou, we are again back in the shutdown mode because of the the resurgence of the pandemic in the last couple of weeks. So I sincerely hope that next time when we have the conference again, you guys can visit Guangzhou in person, and we can meet in person. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks. Klaus? Yeah. Klaus, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, the usual problem. Thanks, Xiaozhang, for introducing the event, and I also am happy to welcome all colleagues and guests on this special event we have again. On behalf of GLO, I welcome all of you around the world. I know you're sitting in all parts of the world, and this is part of the mission also GLO serves. Xiaozhang has already mentioned the title, which is moves away from previous topic significantly, but is not less relevant, but even maybe more relevant in the future. Now, the Global Labor Organization, if you are not a member of it already, it's an independent, non-partisan and non-governmental organization that functions as an international network and virtual platform to stimulate global research, debate, and collaboration. The GLO consists of over 1,700 individuals and 35 organizations covering many more than 120 countries in all parts of the world. And Professor Xiaozhang Fang and Jinan University with IESR is a long-term partner in this venture. And as you have heard already, we already managed to have a few events of this type before. Well, we may face many societal challenges of future global relevance that request the international exchange of scientific knowledge. Crises like the Great Recession, the current pandemic, but also long-term issues like climate change and demographic imbalances request stable and flexible social security systems. So there's a huge diversity of experience around the globe about social assistance programs from which we can all learn. To learn and to help to develop and to improve is the mission of this event. We managed to bring together some of the best experts and bright young researchers from the field to provide guidance, insights, and fresh ideas. We are happy to have Robert Moffitt and Timothy Smeeding as keynote speakers, and we have a larger number of excellent contributing speakers, and I welcome also not only those, but all other participants who are interested to discuss with us. I wish us all inspiring and fruitful exchanges over the 3 days of this focused work days. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Feng and Professor Zimmerman. So we now formally start. We are very honored to have Professor Robert Moffitt to give us the keynote speech. And Professor Moffitt is a Krieger Eisenhower professor from Johns Hopkins University. His studies mainly focus on low income population, and he has many influential works on the social welfare system. And today he is going to talk about the take-up in the social security programs. And the keynote speech is one hour, including 10 minutes Q&A session. So now let's pass the time to Professor Moffitt.
Okay, thank you, Sensui. Let me try to share my screen. There you go. Can everyone see that? Can you see that? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I hope so. Okay. Well, thank you, Sensui, for the introduction, and thank you, Xiaozhang and Klaus, for inviting me to give a keynote here today. Happy to do that. I was going to say I wish I were in Guangzhou instead of where I am, but given what you just said, Xiaozhang, about being in Guangzhou, maybe that's not the best place to be right now. Anyway, I hope to be there in the future. And I want to thank everyone at Jinan for working on this conference, and it's on a topic dear to my heart, so social assistance program, so I'm happy to talk about that. I think it's very interesting that so many countries around the world now are focusing on poverty. Of course, a lot of the most developed countries like the United States and Western Europe have done that for quite a long time. That continues to be a subject of great interest and political initiative. We have a new president of the United States who is actually very interested in poverty and has already initiated a number of new policies. But I think it's very interesting how so many countries at different stages of development over the past 10 or 20 years have decided that poverty is a policy objective, a government objective. China certainly in that category. It's great interest in starting in the 1990s, I believe, introducing poverty and making that a very explicit objective is very interesting. You can put that alongside of India, Mexico, Brazil. A lot of countries have really undertaken major new programs. And the challenge, I think, is that the appropriate program and how to design the program really does depend upon the stage of development. And it depends very much on the state of the institutions, the political, the economic, and governmental institutions that you need to design these programs. So the one that I'll talk about, China, that I only know a little bit about, I will say something about at the end. Certainly in that category, it faces many challenges, very, I would say, not uncommon for a country like China at a stage of development. So I'll say more about that. Okay, so let me see here. First of all, let me just give you my title, which Sensui already announced, which is the Take-Up Program in Social Assistance. This is a very long-standing topic, and it's not one that everyone focuses on initially. Of course, the number one question is, does a social assistance program reduce poverty? That's the objective, but much of that depends upon the take-up problem and how many of the people who are eligible for the program actually enroll. And what those of us who study social assistance programs know that by itself is a challenge, how to get everyone who is eligible for the program to enroll in the program and benefit from it, at least if they wish to. There's no reason to make it mandatory, but at least it should be voluntary, and everyone who wants to enroll should enroll. And certainly if we think it will make them better off. So I think most people would agree with that, although there is a bit of an issue here. Some people may not want to be on the program, and there is a kind of a social policy question here, a social welfare question. How far do you want to encourage people to do it? But most of us, I believe, think you should really want most people to participate if they are eligible. Okay, so that's the motivation. I'd like to start off with asking why don't people take up the money that they're eligible for? I call it the 1 yuan on the sidewalk question. A person walking down the sidewalk in Beijing, they see 1 yuan, they're sitting on the sidewalk. Are they going to pick it up or not? It's free, there's no cost. And maybe they don't. It turns out some people don't pick it up. So this person does pick it up. They picked up the 1 yuan. It was free, and they said, yes, I will pick it up. But not everyone does. And what the question here is obviously the social assistance program. It appears as though many people who are families who are eligible for that 1 yuan, just sitting there, they can get it, and they do not take up that 1 yuan. So why not? That's the question. And what kind of evidence do we have on that question? So it covers this question and issue arises in really all fields of economics. I'm not going to talk about any of those other fields. Comes up many times in tax programs where people do not file for the taxes that they're eligible for, or for the credits they're eligible for, and they make mistakes perhaps, or maybe it's intentional. It comes up a lot in the unemployment insurance program because it seems as though many people eligible for unemployment insurance or in the journals, each of these topics. Retirement benefits is a very big literature in developed countries on whether or not you file for retirement benefits that you're eligible for. Many people do not. Many other applications. Now, as economists, we assume people are rational, but rationality has to be understood. That it means decisions they're being made under imperfect information, costs, perceptions, uncertainty, many other things that affect people's decisions. And rationality will be assumed here, as we always assume it, but we will go with the assumption that if people are not picking up that one yuan, if it's on the sidewalk and they are not picking it up, there must be a reason they are not picking it up. And our challenge is, what is the reason? What is the cause that they aren't picking up that one yuan? So I confess that my talk here is going to be very US focused, although I think the lessons are much more general theoretically. So I'm going to start off talking about theory, but most of my applications and data will be from the US, which I know the most. There's quite a bit of literature in Western Europe as well, and a little bit in South America, and a little bit in India that I'm aware of, but much less in volume. So I will talk about the United States more as an illustration. It's an illustration of the issues, not intended to be applicable to other countries like China. So here are 5 programs in the United States. They're very large programs for the poor. And for every one of these programs, there are estimates of how many of those who are eligible for the program actually receive benefits from the program. So we have a very large food stamp program for the poor that's very highly received. About 83% of eligibles receive that. It's very well advertised and very well known. AFDC TANF is an old program. I won't bother to tell you what those letters stand for. It doesn't matter. It's a cash program for the poor. Right today, well, as of about 3 years ago, I think these estimates are applying to 29%, much, much lower rate of participation. We have a medical program for our poor, somewhere in between, 67%, much closer to 83%. And then we have housing programs which provide below market rent housing units for our poor, only 24%, very, very low participation. And then we have something that runs through the tax system, the earned income tax credit, which gives you a tax credit if you're a worker, you've had earnings, and you file your taxes. That's very highly received, 80%. So you have a huge range here, all the way from 24% all the way up to 83%. A big range. Why? Why is that? Why does it differ so much across these programs? Now, I should emphasize that these are all take-ups of money eligibles. In other words, we're just calculating people's income and see if their income is below the threshold that they need to be eligible for benefits. Some of these programs have other requirements other than money, and that is an issue that I'll come back to. That may be part of the reason why these estimates are sometimes not 100%. Okay, so I will talk about the DABAO program in China. Other countries where there are targeted poverty programs have been studied. Mexico, other South American countries, including Brazil, has a very well-known program. India has a guaranteed jobs program, which is very pretty heavily studied, targeted at the poor. Each of these has its own literature and its own institutional characteristics. So I only refer to them. I'm not going to talk about them more. I will come back and make a few remarks about the DABAO program at the end. Okay, so my outline for my talk here is, first of all, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of theories for why people do not necessarily participate in all programs. And then I'm going to talk about evidence, and I'm only going to draw on the United States. Again, this is kind of illustrative. It shows how you might go about examining this. And perhaps in China, some of the kind of studies that I will report for the United States, maybe some of those studies could be conducted in China as well to study DABAO or other programs. Of course, China has many other programs besides DABAO, and that's a subject for perhaps a different talk. So I'll talk about the theories, the evidence, and then make a few remarks at the end on DABAO. Okay, so what about the theories? I'm going to cover 5 different theories for why we may observe or calculate these participation rates, pardon me, these take-up rates to be less than 100%. I'll spend just a very few 1 minute on mismeasurement. I don't think that's a problem in most of the United States programs, but it may be an important issue in DABAO. So I will come back to mismeasurement when I talk about DABAO. Cost, some kind of cost of participation. Stigma is a popular explanation for non 100% take-up. Information, not having the information that you are eligible is another possible explanation. And then I'm going to call it program constraints, and you'll see what I mean by that. Constraints from the program or from the government, which constrain who can participate and who cannot. And that may also be relevant to DABAO. Okay, so mismeasurement. Let me spend only 1 minute on that. Those of you who've worked in this area know that even estimating those participation rates, those take-up rates, that by itself is not easy to do. We may have data on who participates and who does not, but we have to estimate who is eligible. We typically have some kind of data, sometimes survey data, sometimes administrative data on the population. We have to learn the rules of the program, the eligibility rules of the program, and we take our data and we try to estimate who is eligible and who is not. Now, the fact is that almost every social program I've studied is very, very complicated. It's almost never simply, is your income here and are you below that? It's almost never that simple. There are many complicated rules. There are deductions, there's family size, there are other rules, and measuring those eligibility rules is very difficult with outside data. So it's not easy at all. Now, on the other hand, in a lot of countries like the United States and Western Europe, our data is pretty good, and we do a pretty good job at approximating eligibility, calculating eligibility. So I don't think those take-up rates that I gave you before, from 24% all the way up to 83%, I don't think those are probably too far off in the States. But in other countries, including China, I think that just might be an issue. So it is an issue which I don't want to ignore. There may be some error in our estimating of take-up rates. I do also want to make this one point here about labor supply. Of course, now I'm not going to talk about work incentives and work disincentives in these programs. That's another talk. And of course, I'm very, very interested in that. I've done a lot of work on, as many other people have, on the work incentive question. However, I will say one thing about it, take-up rates, which is that take-up rates are more complicated conceptually when you have work disincentives. And my diagram here is a diagram I hope you all are familiar with, because it's from basic labor economics, showing on the one hand your hours of work and which you lower utility, and your income, which raises utility. You have a budget constraint. And we have a transfer program that provides benefits, B, which raise your income, but they cut off and disappear at some point where you're no longer eligible. Well, some people may initially, before the program, be earning more than the eligibility level, more than the threshold. And then after the program is introduced, they come down, they decided to reduce their income so they can become eligible and receive a positive benefit. So those people up there were not initially eligible. And so they are, in some ways, missed by the calculations, because most of the calculations take people who are below the income level of eligibility and say, what fraction of them? Like this person I here, we observe people here, person down here, it looks like they're eligible for a benefit. They could go up here, but they don't, they're down here. Well, that could be, this person 3 could be down here also. Now, in a way, that should say that our take-up rates may be actually overestimated, because maybe really you should take the people up here and say, well, they're eligible too. Maybe the people up here are eligible. In fact, everybody's eligible. In a way, anybody who could reduce their income and receive benefits is eligible. So it may be that take-up rates, depending on how you define eligibility, may be actually a little bit too high. So I just raised that as a conceptual question. I'm not going to do anything more with it. Okay, what's the second reason people might not participate? Cost, very popular explanation. And I list 3 different kinds here. I call them effort cost. And there's a funny United States word, English word, called hassle, which refers to the fact you have to go through the filling out all the forms, understanding the rules, dealing with the government. You have to talk to someone. Maybe they're not very nice. There are lots of disutilities associated with applying for and participating in programs. There are not anything other than disutility. You'd rather not have to do all those things and receive the benefit. Then there are money costs and time costs. So there are the effort costs, the money costs. So the money cost may be that you have to take a bus or travel to the office to do something. You may have to maybe buy some new clothes so you'll look good when you show up. And there may be some costs associated with preparing documents. It may cost you some money. Those are money costs. The time cost, of course, there's a value of time. And if you're working, you may have to take off time from work, depending upon when the office is open and when you can go. If you go during work hours, you may lose earnings. Now, if you're not working, there's nothing of that time, but all time has value. We know that. So the time spent is another cost. Now, I should say here, I'm going to deal only with static models. I'll say something about dynamic models later. But in the static model, there's going to be a cost here. And whether it's the cost of applying or the cost of participating after you apply is a separate question. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Those are really, in fact, different costs. Usually the cost of applying is greater than the cost of participating. All filling out the forms of eligibility is costly. But after you've qualified and start receiving benefits, then you have to periodically participate and comply with the rules to ensure that you are still eligible. Usually those costs are somewhat lower than the application costs. Okay, so here's a model. You get utility out of income. You have a net income, that net Y is income and net. And P is a participation dummy, 0 or 1 if you're on the program. So this says if P is 0, you get utility out of income. But if you do participate, there's a reduction of utility. And that Greek letter there, psi, is supposed to represent the effort cost. It's pure disutility. If you participate, it lowers utility. So you can see a basic lesson here, which is that there's a trade-off. The higher the income, you're more likely to participate, but the higher the disutility cost, you are less likely to participate. And you're only going to participate if your increase in your income is greater than the disutility cost. Now, the net income, you get a benefit B from the program, and then I'm going to assume you might have earnings. Here's the hourly wage rate times your hours of work. The hours of work minus what I'm going to call the time cost. So you have to take off half a day, 4 hours, to go to the program office. And then if P is 1, then you lose 4 hours in the day. How many hours per week? And that reduces your earnings. And then there are money costs over here, which simply come out of your income, and those are called CM. So the decision here, do I want to participate or not? Well, you just compare the utility of P of 1 versus the utility of P of 0. You subtract them, and that's what I've done on the next page here. If I'll call it P star, which is the utility gain from joining the program, and I've set it up as a probit model or a binary choice model because you're going to participate if that utility gain is positive and you won't participate otherwise. Utility gain is the direct utility of your income. You will suffer time cost and money cost minus the utility if you don't participate. And then the psi here, I could have put the psi over here, is the effort cost, the disutility of participating in the program. So the question is B high enough? Is B high enough to outweigh the CT, the CM, and the psi? That's the question. And it may not be. You may choose not to participate. So one lesson here is obviously the higher the benefit, you would think you're more likely to participate. Another lesson here is that if W is high, then you lose more income. So maybe if W is high, you or at least a given amount of C, you may lose more income. So higher wage people should be less likely to apply. Plus the utility curve is concave. If this thing is concave, it means that B is going to have a greater gain in utility for the low wage people. Low income people have a higher marginal utility gain. That's an old result from the concavity of the utility function. So that's a basic model which describes why people might not participate. Maybe time costs are high, and maybe money costs are high, or maybe the utility, disutility, the effort cost, hassle, if you want to call it that, is very high. Okay, that was cost. I did cost. Next is stigma, and there are really two types of stigma. The English word stigma means I'm ashamed, I'm embarrassed. It really, I don't want to be a welfare recipient. I don't want to be on welfare. It lowers my utility simply to be on welfare. And what that implies, another way to say that is that I get utility out of income, but I would always prefer my income to come out of private income than welfare income from the government. I would always prefer one type of income over the other. That's what we're really talking about here. So there are two types of stigma in the literature. One is internal stigma, feelings of negative self-worth, self-esteem. I really personally, it hurts me inside to be a welfare recipient. And the external stigma is other people see me be a welfare recipient, and I feel bad because I'm embarrassed by the fact that other people see me. And these are different types of stigma. For example, I may receive a benefit and no one knows I'm a welfare recipient. Then there's no external stigma. I'm not embarrassed by it. I can hide it. Maybe no one knows it, but I may still feel bad about it myself. Or it could go the other way around. I don't have any embarrassment. I'm poor. I deserve a benefit, but other people see me, and then I am embarrassed by that. So there's an article here by Besley and Coate quite a long ago, has real good discussion, cites a lot of literature by sociologists and psychologists on the distinction between these two, and they both seem to be present. Different articles put different emphasis on them. So as far as internal stigma is concerned, well, that is just the same as the effort cost, because you just say if P is 1, this lowers my utility of being on welfare. So that is really the same. It looks the same algebraically, that is to say, same mathematically as the disutility of participating, the effort and the hassle cost. So pretty much the same. So there is a decision. You just have the stigma term and nothing else. That's all that it determines. Will stop you. And then there's a disutility of participating, P of 1 or 0. But how much disutility is depends upon P bar, which is the mean participation rate in my peer group, at least the people who see me, who know me. And the idea here is that if P bar is very high, okay, let me continue. I apologize. I just switched my router to get a more stable connection. And let me share my screen again. Apologies for that. Okay, so it's just a pure effects model. And I cite some of the papers in the literature which have used this model, Besley, Coate, Lindbeck, Bertrand Lumber. And they're all the same, having these pure group effects. Now, if you were familiar with this literature on pure effects, it's really a subset of the larger social interaction literature. And I've mentioned some of the prominent papers here. Mansky, I did a paper on it back in 2001. Brock and Durloff. There are lots of econometric issues here. For example, you can't just put P bar on the right-hand side of a regression. And it is a general equilibrium problem. You have to derive the equilibrium where each individual's decisions holding constant that P bar adds up to the P bar that's actually in the area. So you have to make sure the equilibrium constraints are fulfilled. It's really interesting literature because you can get a lot of multiple equilibria. You can get in the equilibrium where P bar is very high, like everyone's participates. And so the disutility is very low. Or you can get an equilibrium where P bar is very low and almost nobody participates. Nobody wants to participate because nobody else does. So you can get these two equilibria and some of them are unstable. Brock and Durloff show that under certain functional forms, you get two equilibria and you can bounce back between them, and the government can increase the benefit or decrease the benefit. You can jump from one equilibrium to another. So It's very interesting model and interesting literature. Okay, so next explanation is information. And they can set this in a lot of different ways. The way I set it up is that you have subjective probability that you're eligible. I don't know, it's uncertainty. And I don't have very much information, so I really don't know what the true probability is. Now, if we were able to take some people who are eligible and we're correct in our calculations, they're all eligible. So we know the true probability is 1, but they don't know that. And some of them think the probability is less than 1. And in that case, they don't have much information. And they may say PS 0. They may think I'm not eligible at all. So this is a very general model. And what they're going to do is they're going to calculate the expected utility of applying. So if they apply, which is the application decision I'm talking about here, if they apply, they'll get utility of U of B plus WH multiplied by the probability they think they will be eligible minus the cost of application. So it's kind of similar to the other models. If they don't apply, utility is just UWH, so you just get the usual kind of application here. So that could explain it. Now, of course, they may be uncertain about B too. Maybe they don't quite know what the benefit is. There are lots of sources of uncertainty that might be present here. A couple of other wrinkles in this model. You could say that the government affects that PS here. Maybe that PS here is determined by how much information the government provides. Maybe they advertise it, maybe they don't. So that the government certainly has some power over what PS is. And the other thing that can happen here is that the person could acquire information at some cost. So I may not know, and there's an old rule here in most of these models in economics, which is that people acquire information if they think they want to acquire it. It is costly. They only acquire information if they think there's a probability that it will benefit them. So it may be that people who don't have the information just think they're not on the margin or they're not even close. And so they don't even bother to acquire their information. Still, some people who are eligible won't bother to acquire it because it's too costly. They could go out and spend some time investigating it and find out, but that's a costly activity. Okay, finally is program constraints. And here I'm talking about government actions. All the models I've talked about so far, for the individual, the family is making a decision, do I apply or do I not apply? They're calculating the utility of application and the utility of not applying. And it's purely their decision. And they know that if they apply, they maybe with some probability, but their income will be looked at and they will be allowed to be on if they are eligible. So there's no question about whether they're eligible or not. Now, I'm just including in this category other classes of models where they go in and they apply and the government makes some kind of decision. It says no. They might say no, we're not going to let you on this program. And that's a completely different kind of model. Now, in the very extreme cases of quota, where the government just says, we're only going to let a certain number of people on here, and that's all. In fact, we have one program like that in the United States, the housing program. There's only a certain number of housing units, and if there's not one available, it doesn't matter if you're eligible. No, you can't get on the program. Now, that's an extreme case. I think the better case would be where the government has some objective function themselves, and they're putting priority on who they want to allow onto the program. So they're going to assign a value. And the way I've written this down here in these equations is a person who walks in the door, the government looks at them. They look at their observable characteristics X. And they look at some things I call unobservables, because what I mean by that is we can't observe them in the data, econometricians, but the government can. And they evaluate the value of how much they want to have this person on receiving social assistance. And then they have some minimum value there. And they assign a minimum and only accept people whose value is above some level. So this is a priority system where the government assigns priority. They're only going to let people who they think are most deserving or most qualified to participate. So in this case, you have another probate model, but in this case, it's the government making the decision, 1 or 0, yes or no, will this person be allowed to be on? So that's the model. And in the extreme case, it could be a quota system. where they say if you're we have a limit, and that's what Q min. That's how we're going to choose Q min, only to satisfy a requirement for the number of recipients. So it does nest that. And this kind of model, the individuals still choose to apply. And one of the wrinkles in this model is that most applicants know they know that the government may not let them in, so that may discourage them from applying. So in fact, if the government does this, it may lower the application rate because people know there's a lower probability. That's kind of like the information case for the probability. Even if they know they're eligible, they may not apply because they think they may not be allowed on. They may be rejected. But the government is the agent here. This is an agency model. The government is the one who's choosing that minimum, and the rational government knows that it will affect how many people apply too. So they will make that decision. So if the government choosing Q min, and the equilibrium occurs where they choose their Q min, and what's the take-up rate? The take-up rate is the fraction of people who both apply, because not everybody applies. The people who apply and the government accepts them. So there are two decisions here, and they both have to be one. The person has to apply and the government has to decide to accept them before the person is on the program. Government has other tools. For example, they can increase costs. So that's not Q min, but they could just increase the cost if they want to reduce applications. Lots of things the government can do. Okay, let me just make an aside here on a different question, which is raised by the government model. The government model is one in which they assign priorities, and the government ultimately is the one that decides who gets on welfare and who does not. Is it the poorest, very poorest people, or the not poor people? Is it the workers, the non-workers, large families, small families? The government decides. More generally, exactly who is on the program is unclear. I said before that there's kind of a implication there that the people with high wages are less likely to participate and low wages are more likely to participate. People with higher benefits are more likely to participate. All those models seem to imply that the poorest people are more likely to be on the program because they get more utility out of it. However, it's been pointed out very recently in this literature that's not necessarily the case. It depends upon all those costs, those stigma, and uncertainty. Because in those models, and I'll say this, the cost, stigma, and uncertainty are correlated with W, you could get different results. For example, suppose those with lowest levels of education have the most difficulty applying. Perhaps you need some kind of, you have to be very smart about applying. You really have to know how to negotiate the bureaucracy. You have to know how to overcome the cost. You have to know how to fill out the forms. You have to know how to talk to the government bureaucrats. Maybe more educated people can do that. And they're the ones who can figure out how to get onto the rolls. So that raises the possibility that perhaps the neediest people are the ones who can't comply. So that's, as far as the model goes, that's a case where the costs are correlated with W. So I raised that as a question, and the question is not answered. It's an empirical question, but it raises the possibility that who receives assistance may not be the most advantaged people. In fact, there's a paper which has been talked about a lot lately, back in 1982 by Nichols and Zeckhauser, which is pretty much about this. And it presumes that those who have the neediest are the most likely to apply. And a lot of people have pointed out that model may be wrong. So I'll leave it at that. Dynamic models, I'll skip in the interest of time. Okay, so now as I say here, I'm going to briefly run through some evidence and talk about some US findings just to illustrate the kinds of things that people have done. So I have a paper back in 1983, which began the discussion of stigma. And I had no real evidence for stigma, to be perfectly honest. It was just a cost. And I cited the sociological literature on internal stigma. That was what I was interested in. And then I estimated a model of participation. In my application, the take-up rate was about 1/3 in the program I was looking at. I did find that it seemed to be the rate of the take-up seemed to be correlated with need, when how worse off people were. So the higher the wage rate, the less likely you were to participate, and the higher the benefit, the more likely to participate. So it was all kind of good news. It was a selection bias model because those who participate are going to be those who have the greatest gains. So There was the standard econometric model there. I did another paper with Fraker in 1988 where we added food stamps, our food program. And there you have two programs. And the interesting thing there is that if you are stigmatized by both of them, but the stigma is positively correlated, then once you participate in one of them, the additional stigma might be very low for the second one. So if you participate in one, you're more likely to participate in the other one, other things being equal. And so we find a very positive correlation between participation in the two of them. So I'll leave that at that. It's just a different point. Hillary Horns has a paper of two-parent programs. She found that two parents in the program she was looking at in the United States had a very, very low take-up rate, 0.08. And she modeled joint family labor supply. But I think she did not model it, but I think that's a program constraint. I think the government, US government, prefers to have single parents receive benefits. They think they're needier. So that was probably the explanation for that. I have a paper with Mike Keene, 1998. There we had three programs. So adding it to three, the same kind of point. If you're participating in one of them, you're more likely to participate in all of them. It turns out that the government program, 0.08, 8% participated in all three, which is a pretty high percentage to participate in three of them. The government, the housing program, is more of a quota system in the United States. And it turned out we couldn't really estimate a good model for participation rate in housing. Whatever priority system the government is using, we weren't able to estimate it. There's an interesting paper in 1999 with Seth Sanders and some other people. They went to a town called city of Pittsburgh in the United States, and they did an RCT. What they did was they took people who were not on food stamps, and they randomly divided them into treatment control group. In treatment group, they actually calculated eligibility. So you are eligible or you're not eligible. Give us your income, we will tell you. And they didn't do that for the control group. The control treatment group had a big increase in participation. Once you told them they were eligible, very large increase in take-up. So that suggests information. It's information. These people simply did not know. It did turn out that the people who didn't know were typically higher income people. And maybe they just didn't feel it was worth acquiring the information. And the benefit that they got once they reached on the program was smaller than the benefit that lower income people would get. So it's also consistent with that uncertainty information. Curry and Grogger, and I'll spend a second on here because this has to do with participation. They looked at a case where the program required you to come back in periodically and say that you're still eligible. So you had to go back in every 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, or a year and have your income reported to see if you were still eligible. And they had some variation in how often you had to come in. And it turned out that the more often you have to come in, you have to go in all the time, you're less likely to do that. You drop off, you say, that's not worth it. It's too costly for me to go in all the time and comply. So that says costs are the important thing. And I should say right off the bat, we're not going to have any answer to which one, cost or information, stigma. The literature just can't separate those all. It probably is different for every program. So just these articles are just each emphasizing one thing rather than another. Janet Curry did some work quite a while ago, and I'll skip that. There's nothing too much new there. John Hamm and Laura Shore-Shepard have a Medicaid program. Take-up rate, there's about 51%, so that's not too bad. They emphasize heterogeneity. A wide range of different kinds of people participate. Some groups have 12 percentage points, and other people have 79 percentage points probability of participating. Depends on your number of children, your income, all kinds of things determine it. So it's not just a single number there. That suggests there really is a utility maximizing decision being made here. I'll skip this one, the tax credit. The paper recently on food stamps again and so on. This one's kind of interesting. It had to do with our disability programs. And in this paper, the authors looked at the fact that the government closed some offices. They went in one year and said, it's too expensive. We have offices all over the area, and we're going to close half of them, close it down. And that means you have to travel farther. If you want to apply, participate, you have to travel farther. Transportation cost is much, much higher now. And the authors found a big reduction in their take-up rate, about 16 percentage point decline, which is a large decline for that program. Suggests transportation costs is also important. If there's not a nearby office, you may not participate. The paper by Amy Finkelstein and Matt Windigo, it's kind of an odd paper, but they were looking at people who are already on one program for the elderly. And because of that, the authors could calculate their eligibility for food stamps exactly. Because for Medicare, you have to report your income and all your circumstances. And they went to the people on Medicare who were not on food stamps, and they just gave them a letter that you're eligible. And they got a very big take-up rate. And they did find that the take-up was very favorable in the sense that the people who took it up were the less needy than the people who were already on it. So it looked like there was a positive selection, which is the kind of selection you want. But they also found that a lot of people who were still not taking up the program, not taking up food stamps, were very, very needy. So it looked like there were still some unfavorable effects on participation. And then I have a paper, and I think it's the only one I know of, which actually looked at the government program constraints, because I went back to the 1980s, and back then the AFTC program, which is our cash program for the poor, was government run by our states. And the United States has 51 states and jurisdictions. But China has a lot of provinces and villages too, very similar. Lots of geographic variation. And the states had a lot of control. And it turned out that the states really did restrict the caseload. And I got data on actually their actions, how many barriers, administrative barriers they were imposing. And it was highly correlated with participation in this program. Some of our states are very conservative, imposed a lot of effort, their time costs, and participation was lower in those areas. Book by Herd Moynihan calls this administrative burdens. The government imposed a burden and made it much more difficult to apply. So there's that as well. So I'll skip that one. Okay, so I'm getting close to that 15 minutes. I do want to stop on time. So let me make some outsider's remarks about the DeBow program and the relevance of all the things I've talked about to DeBow. And I want to immediately say I am far from an expert on DeBow. So I've just read a few things and about it and basing my knowledge on that, on the existing literature. I'm certainly not an expert on all the details of it and how it really works in practice. And I'm only going to talk about the rural component. There's an urban component. And it's an interesting program. I mean, it's a minimum living standard program. As far as number of recipients, you're talking about one of the largest programs in the world here, given the number of recipients. Began in the 1990s, I believe, phased in different areas. And at least the rural component, I believe, became national, required in all villages and provinces in 2007. And it's just it's the classic type of unconditional cash transfer program. I say unconditional, I mean, there aren't a whole lot of, at least supposed to be, not a lot of other restrictions and requirements other than just having low income. And each area sets its threshold. And if your income falls below that, then the government fills in the gap. They just give you a benefit which raises your income up to that minimum. So it's what we call a fill the gap program. Economists many times don't particularly like that kind of program because that does impose 100% marginal tax rate on any increase in earnings. If your earnings go up by 100 yuan, they're going to lower your benefit by 100 yuan exactly. So that may not be very good from a work incentive point of view, but that's a different issue. I'm not going to talk about the work incentives. The most important thing, as far as I can see, in the DeBow program is that so much of the authority over the program is allocated to the local village and the local area that runs it, almost on a village level program, as far as I can tell, in the rural areas. The villages decide who gets onto the program, and they even decide the benefit amounts. The benefit amounts are supposed to be tailored to the local environment and local economy and what the living standards and income standards are. And I said there is an urban program. I'm just not going to talk about that. There's a lot of concern that I've read about targeting. So a large fraction of participants may not meet the eligibility conditions. There are people who seem to be above the income level and still participating, and a lot of people below. Maybe about a 20% take-up rate among eligibles. I've seen some of the studies give numbers in that range. This is obviously very low take-up rate of eligibles. The application process is very different across areas. It's not always an open-ended program where anyone can walk in the door, your income is checked, and you just get it. In a lot of these villages, apparently, the village community leaders kind of invite people, and they say, "Hey, you know, come in and invite," or "You come in and invite." They kind of announce what kind of priorities they want, and even issue invitations, which of course is very much in my program constraints model, where the government is really deciding who is in there. You know, the United States doesn't have too many of these programs. We used to several decades ago. And what we found was if you allow the local government to have too much control, then they're going to start making decisions about who they think is deserving, that word deserving there. You know, local elites, local government officials will say, "I think you deserve," but you don't. You know, you're making an effort, you're trying, but you're not trying. So I'm not going to give it to you. You know, you've been exerted bad behavior. I'm not going to give it to you. I like you. You've done good behavior. I'll give it to you. And you see that, we used to see that happen when we, in some of our programs, we tried to get away from that, but I think it's an inevitable consequence. I want to mention that measuring rural income is very difficult because if you get income from agriculture or income from non-wage and salary sources, you're not in the rural wage labor market, maybe some of you grow your own food, it's very, very difficult to measure income. We've had that problem in the United States too. Rural areas, these welfare programs are kind of tough if you talk about people who are doing farming. And that's a real serious measurement problem. My perception is that in the villages, they don't always use income. They look at your assets. Do you have a house? How much is it worth? Do you have any money in the bank? Do you have any savings? They're looking at other measures to try other than pure income. Now, you know, there's a question about whether that's a good idea or not. Well, maybe that's good. Maybe that's a better way of assessing need in rural areas than pure cash income. And if so, then the mismeasurement problem I mentioned back at the beginning might be one that you have to worry about here. The estimates of low take-up rates in Davao are based upon pure cash income estimates from survey data, where you go in, you measure cash income and see whether people's incomes are below the threshold. Well, if the villages are using something other than income to determine eligibility, whether you like it or not, just a factual matter, you may not be getting the estimates correct. So it's a very difficult problem, measurement problem that we as economists and statisticians need to worry about. And I haven't seen a lot of discussion of that in the literature, but it would be much better to try to get some data, maybe finer estimates of eligibility than I think have been done so far. Now, which of these cost factors that I've talked about so far are most likely to pertain and devalue? Well, I think really the government program constraints is the most likely one. And again, I'm guessing there, and other people can comment on that. If these are very local programs, you're talking about one village, I can't see information as being a big problem here. People probably know what the rules are. Now, the government may exercise that rule, you know, in a very uncertain way, but it's not like they don't know about the program. They're not completely ignorant of it. They probably know about it. The costs, I don't know if the costs are high or not. I suspect they're not that high. Maybe transportation is very close by, but that's not a problem. I think it's most likely that the village community leaders, the village councils, are exercising control over who gets on and who does not. Stigma, I don't know about stigma. I read one paper that said that people in these local villages are very stigmatized by being on this program. I mean, you're in a local village here. Everybody knows everybody else, you know, and you're on receiving the bow, you're not. Well, people may feel very bad about that. So stigma may be important here. And how to reduce stigma is a big question. I don't know the answer to that. So my last slide here, there's a large literature on the benefit cost of local control, hotly debated issue in the US. As you probably know, Western Europe is much more centralized. The US has a tradition of decentralization where we allow our states and localities to make a lot of decisions. There's a constant debate about this. And I think that most of the people in the US would like to prefer a mixed system where the central government imposes some restrictions. So you've got to have some rules you have to follow, but not all the rules. And some local discretion is allowed. Some kind of mixed central local system. But finding the right balance is very difficult. If you restrict localities too much, then they won't be able to adapt to the local circumstances. But if you put too few restrictions, then the localities are to pursue a different objective function in the central government. They're going to optimize over something different that the central government may not really want. So there's a trade-off here, and it's very hard to find a balance. You do also need the central government to go in and monitor this. They're going to set rules, maybe not all the rules, but they have to go in and check to make sure the local government is actually following the rules. And that's hard in the United States, and I'm sure it would be very difficult in China as well. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening. I put my email here, or if later anyone would like to email me comments, and I'll stop. So
Thank you so much.
Since Shui, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Professor Moffitt. I think your talk is really important to us. Yes. And now it is a Q&A time. Professor Zimmerman has left 2 questions in the chat bot. And if you, yes, you can also unmute yourself. Yeah. Professor Zimmerman, yeah.
Yes, and yeah, Robert, first I would like to thank you very much for a very instructive and very interesting talk, which is very helpful to understand this important topic, because most people in society, when we talk about social assistance, people think everybody takes it, yes, because it looks so rational, and in fact it's not. But now you have told us a lot about the causes of not taking up, but the question is, what is about the consequences? Yes. It's not just, I mean, we could say, okay, we don't have to spend money, but often, most of the time, social assistance is to help people to improve and get better. And so if people are not taking up welfare, that is typically a mistake, not only for them, but also for society.
Yeah, well, I think there are both factual questions there and also questions about what your policy objectives are. Let me just say that the factual questions, I was a member of a committee here in the United States a couple of years ago. Tim's meeting was on that too, committee, but we did make some calculations of how much an increase in the take-up rate would affect our poverty rates. Of course, the United States has a very well-defined poverty line, so we were kind of focused on that. And for some of these programs, like our housing programs, which have very low take-up rates, like 24%, we could reduce the poverty rate by 1/5, by 20%, which is a lot. I mean, get your poverty rate down by that simply by increasing the take-up rate, in the housing program. There are too many people who are just low income who are not getting it. And our so-called TANF program, same way, increase the take-up rate. So you're missing a huge opportunity. There are really costs to poverty reduction by having these low take-up rates. As far as weight goes, I mean, the stigma here, is one, I think that, it's a very political one. I think most of us feel as though, from our own political view, that if you're eligible, you deserve the benefit. I mean, the government passed a law which says that if your income is below this, you should get a benefit. You should get it. And we feel bad if there's stigma involved, that somehow people are embarrassed by it. But how the government can affect that, I don't know. What do? Do you advertise? Do you try to make it secret or something so that no one else knows about it? I don't think anyone's come up with a good policy lever to reduce stigma other than just kind of telling people, please, apply. The thing you can manipulate are the costs, and we have one program, the food stamp program. It's funny in the United States, we have some programs where the government, they're out there trying to get people to apply. And we have other programs where, particularly the ones run by local governments, where they're trying to stop people from applying. They're trying to put up barriers. So it all depends on the program. But our food stamp program, which is run by a federal government, they want everybody to apply. And so back in the 2000s, they went out and they did all these things. They advertised in billboards. They went into the application procedures and they simplified them. They shortened the form. So instead of a 10-page form, it's a 1-page form. They changed the language. So it's a very easy language to understand. One of the problems here is the government always assumes that everyone has a college education. So they prepare a form and all the words are on the form require you to have a college education before you even know what they mean. So they went in and they simplified it, and all the words were very simple words. And they did all kinds of stuff like that. And the take-up rates of the food stamps were way up. And there have been a number of studies showing, cross-state variation in what states did, big impact. So I think the cost is the one that you can really manipulate. That's the most important one. I think the government has the most control over, and it seems to have a big impact. I don't know about how to do about stigma. Information, that's kind of part. The food stamp people did that too. They had all kinds of information campaigns. They had a radio, go on the radio, please apply, come in and find out if you're eligible. So you can do something about information. So there's plenty the government can do here if they want to, I think. Okay, I see, thank you, Klaus. And Laura has a comment.
Yeah, maybe I can just raise it briefly in person. So yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. So I work a lot on India's welfare program that you briefly referenced, so the NREGA program. And there, I think a very interesting gray area that I think you touch on when you think about the social costs of stigma is that a lot of these politicians are poorly paid themselves. And so pro forma actually are eligible themselves for the program, but might face then the trade-off if they take it up. In addition to any stigma, they might also be seen as being corrupt, especially if they're personally in charge of actually administering the scheme. So I guess I was interested. I'm sure there's not much on the U.S. side on this, but how you would see about maybe that being an issue for.
No, that's very interesting, Laura. Is there something actually been written on that specific issue on the India program?
Not really. So I've done some recent work where we show that there is self-dealing.
That's very interesting. I can quite imagine, and that might be where it worked in some of the China villages. I don't know, and it's not. I think in China, my perception is it's not really corruption. It's just that the local elites, are making discretionary decisions on who gets in and who not. But that may create some kind of disfavor too. But no, that's a very interesting thought. But certainly you're right. The corruption. I thought that in fact in the India program that there's still a lot of people who can't. It's supposed to be a guaranteed employment program, but in fact it's not really. And is that correct? If you go in and you may not be able to actually get a job even though you're interested. So
definitely.
Yeah. Are there take-up rates? What's the take? Is there been any estimates of eligibles in the take-up rate?
Yes, and it's very hard to estimate again because data is really difficult to come by, and really, as long as we live in a rural area, everyone theoretically is supposed to be eligible. But even if you do surveys and you look at people that say they would like to take it up, there's still massive excess demand.
Well, I tell you, the stigma, a lot of the stigma stuff, and we're all quantitative people, so we don't like surveys very much. But I read surveys. I think they're important. And you ask people, what they think of the programs. And that's where you uncover a lot of the stigma. I can imagine in India, you might uncover the idea of corruption there. be honest, I'm far from an expert, but my understanding is, corruption in general in India is a longstanding, problem at all levels of government and very difficult thing to eradicate. And I'm present in a number of other countries. India is not unique in that, but very interesting stigma aspect of that. Yeah, thanks, Laura.